What a great crowd. Thank you so much for being here this evening. I'm John Gately, and I'm honored to serve as the chair of the Hampton Military Affairs Committee, or as we call ourselves, the MAC. On behalf of Mayor George Wallace, who is en route back to us, other city leaders and fellow members of the MAC, we welcome you to this salute to heroes of Hampton Roads today. We recognize a former Korean War era Army corporal for his tenacity in ensuring a singular act of extraordinary courage by one of Hampton's own native sons in a later war received appropriate recognition. We also recognize a group of African Americans, the Tuskegee Airmen, here in their red coats, symbolizing those planes that flew in World War II with those red tails. They not only fought the downward force of gravity, as anyone does in flight, but they also fought the downward force found in the suppression of the spirit within a nation that was then segregated. All those who fought in uniform were ostensibly united in a common fight, but still seemingly inexorably divided along racial lines. Simply stated, the Tuskegee Airmen fought a military enemy so well in the air that the chains of bigotry and bias on the ground were weakened, albeit ever so slowly. To get here, you all, I trust, walked the first floor hallway. If you didn't do it, it was a miracle. And I hope you passed a cast bronze bust of Lieutenant Ruppert Sargent with his Medal of Honor. I hope you noticed that within his upturned palms, in his cupped hands, there were two smaller figures, representative of at least the two lives that he saved when he threw himself on two grenades to save his fellow soldiers. You also, whether consciously or not, passed the Freedom Shrine. That Freedom Shrine has exact photographic reproductions of our founding documents as a nation, including the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, and the U.S. Constitution. Those are the very documents, the fulfillment of which in letter and spirit are the reason men and women choose to wear the uniform of our nation. That's why they serve. That's why so many too often die in defense of our liberties. And here in the Veterans Conference Room, you'll notice walls with plaques and mountings that represent the 5 uniformed services and the contribution of our local heroes. But we're not here to note present or future plaques on walls. That's not what this is about at all. Instead, we're here to celebrate those whose unflagging, indomitable spirit and commitment have inspired and will continue to inspire the citizens of this city and this nation for many years to come. I'd ask you to direct your attention to Chaplain Bill Burrell, who's the Vice President of the Tidewater chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen. Bill.
It's good to see you, and it's good to be seen. I invite you now to pray with me as we offer the invocation for this evening. First, let us pause as a unit to remember the men and women who had donned a uniform to serve our country, especially those who gave the ultimate sacrifice. Let us pause to remember them first. Let us pray. God our Father, today we pause to say thank you for every good and perfect gift that you have blessed us with. Today we come to honor those whom you have used to be a perfect gift for our Department of Defense and for our nation. And today we simply call them, God, the heroes of Hampton Roads. We thank you, God, for their dedication, their sacrifice, their stick-to-itness and resolve. But today is a launching pad that reminds us that sacrifice of our nations continue in distant lands and around the globe. And today we continue to reflect on the sacrifice of our current generation of warriors, including those members of Hampton Roads like Private First Class Lewis, Jr., United States Army, Lance Corporal Schumann, United States Marine, who were both killed in Iraq, as well as Lieutenant Weaver and Sergeant Chamber in the Army who was killed in Afghanistan, and many other comrades who answered the call of duty. For that we say thank you. And this evening, God, we thank you for those who have paused for a moment to make sure those like them who are given a great sacrifice to be honored. We thank you, God, for Andy Greenwell, for his foresight to receive a letter, but more so, God, to make a commitment for Ruppert Sargent. And today, God, we thank you for his gift of insight and vision. May you bless him and sustain him and his family. And God, we thank you, God, for those who blazed a great trail called the Tuskegee Airmen. For indeed, dear God, they fought two fights. They fought the fight for the right to fight for our nation, and they fought for our nation with valor. So God, we ask now, God, that you bless them as we honor them this evening. And we're also grateful, God, for their family members who have propelled them when times were hard and the going was tougher than words can express. Please bless them for their gifts of support and endurance. And we pray that this day, because right now, we hew out a stone that will stand to remember the legacy of great warriors of present and past. This is our prayer. In your most holy name, amen.
Amen. I'm already emotionally moved. I hope you are. For the first time in memory, the MAC actually interrupted a normal sequence of business meetings, if you will. We're in the business of service of those who serve, our active duty force, our veterans, their families. But we put a full stop to that for this special celebration of distinguished local heroes. In a special event like this, it should come as no surprise that we have special visitors today, and they will include our mayor, George Wallace, our councilman, Will Moffitt, Councilman Donnie Tuck, Councilwoman Teresa Smith, Major General Wallace C. Arnold, former Commanding General of U.S. Army ROTC Cadet Command, Colonel William Bill Galbraith, and his Command Sergeant Major James Jackson, from the 733rd Mission Support Group, what old guys like me used to call Post Commander, Installation Commander, and his Sergeant Major. And we appreciate your being here. Command Chief Master Sergeant Mark Hurt from the 633rd Air Base Wing, what we'd call the Command Chief Master Sergeant of the installation, Langley Air Force Base. Mike Coons, the president and the CEO of the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. Steve Mallon, who happens to be a son-in-law of Andy Greenwell, but also serves as the president of the Langley Civic Leaders Association. And then there are all kinds of friends from veteran service organizations and other organizations that contribute so much to the quality of life in our service of the active duty force, veterans and others, including the Military Order of the Purple Heart, the American Legion, the VFW, the DAV, the Korean War Association, and a new organization that was once called the Waves, the military women across the nation. We have a representative from St. Mary's, Star of the Sea, Nancy Vessel. And they're here because they were here for the dedication of the Ruppert Sargent building, and they wanted to be here for this event. Finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't express thanks to Jim Wilson, who's the Director of Parks and Rec, because if you see things set up like this, his thumbprints are under your chair. And I thank his members of the staff that have done such a great job and taking care of what we're going to be eating in our reception later. I want to thank Ann Bain, Government and Military Liaison for our Hampton Public Schools. another one who has a great passion for our military and has much to do with many elements of the event tonight. Bruce Sturck, our Director of Facility Support, retired Air Force himself, and really the go-to guy for our Military Affairs Committee in the city. I also thank you. The reason that the MAC is perceived as a vibrant organization is only through a hedge of protection that's provided by our military, a platform of support by our elected and appointed officials, and then partnerships, both those I've expressed and some that I haven't, and so we thank you all. Let's get into the honorees. Andy Greenwell, the unspoken hero of the Ruppert Sargent building. In the interest of impartiality and full declaration, this is a confession. I really like this guy. He's a senior member of the MAC. Anywhere Andy goes, he's a senior member. To be in Andy's company, inevitably, is to leave uplifted and encouraged. He drives a car that has a license plate that marks him forever as an Army corporal. This guy is truly kind and humble. He was a senior leader in Hampton for many years. He managed the Hampton Coliseum during what most of the old-timers will call the glory years. I don't know if I've ever told you this, Andy, but I have seen, this is not a joke, folks, I have seen a private video owned by someone in the city of Andy Greenwell escorting the Rolling Stones through, it gets better, through the Hampton Coliseum. Now this is really strange, and there's not any element of this that is kinky, but I will tell you, on that video, you see the Stones in a men's bathroom. One has a live boa constrictor around his neck. The other is wearing a gorilla costume. Andy, you must have really known how to throw a party. On a more serious note, through the example of people like Andy, the MAC feels an overwhelming obligation to recognize the nobility of our military and our veterans' service and the significance of their sacrifice. Even while we try to meet both the expressed and the unexpressed, often implied needs of our current generation of warriors as well. As we express our gratitude, we don't forget that the greatest form of appreciation isn't to utter words, but to live by them. It's not to talk the talk. It's to walk the walk. And such is the case for hero of Hampton Roads, Andy Greenwell.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mayor Wallace, fellow veterans, members of the Military Affairs Committee, and fellow citizens of Hampton. I met Andy in the spring or the summer of 2001 through my membership in veterans groups like the Veterans of Foreign Wars and the Military Order of the Purple Heart. Over the next year and a half, Andy was our inspiration and our guide as we planned the dedication of this building. Andy had the name, through the 1967 letter, of B Company Commander Waddy Smith, who you saw in the video. Using the internet white pages, I was able to find Waddy Smith at his home in Etowah, Tennessee, reached him on the phone, and Andy and Waddy became fast friends as soon as Waddy visited Hampton. And of course, Waddy was a speaker here at the October 2002 building dedication ceremony. We need to edit the video because it was 25th Infantry Division, not the 20th Division. I saw a couple soldiers who spotted that right away. 25th Tropic Lightning Division, and the shoulder insignia is displayed in the shadow box. So we need to edit the video.
Waddy Smith regrets his absence today. He's having knee surgery.
This, I'm sure, is a legacy of several hundred parachute jumps. Waddy was in Special Forces and Infantry for between 20 and 30 years. So if a veteran of the heavy forces can be allowed an editorial, mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be paratroopers. Or at least make them think twice about it. On the day the building was dedicated, we had also other fellow soldiers of B Company, 4th of the 9th Infantry from as far away as Oklahoma and Texas here to meet with Waddy Smith and the family members of Ruppert Sargent. Over an 18-month period, 2001-2002, I was to learn that Andy is one of Hampton's movers and shakers. You heard about that. He could connect the veterans service volunteers to the city manager, to General Arnold, to State Senator Hunter Andrews, to newspapers like the Daily Press, the Virginian Pilot, to Brian DeProfio of the city staff, and other influential Hamptonians. No one worked harder than Brian DeProfio, who made himself a master of details such as the framed replica B Company guidon and the shadow box that you see here of Ruppert Sargent's badges, decorations, and service medals. On the dedication day, Delegate Mary Christian of the Virginia House of Delegates also spoke. She introduced the formal resolution in the Virginia General Assembly commending the life of Ruppert Sargent, and a framed copy of that resolution is on the wall over toward the right rear. You noted in the video that Mayor Locke, at that time the mayor of our city, also spoke at the dedication. The Medal of Honor project was actually the predecessor to the Hampton Military Affairs Committee, which first convened under Dr. Alvin Bryant for about 5 years. Dr. Bryant passed away in 2010. And later now, under John Gately as its chairman, the Military Affairs Committee is one of the most effective advocates in our area for service members, veterans, and their families. The Medal of Honor project brought together Hamptonians and others from all walks of life, united in our desire to honor and remember a soldier who grew up here in Phoebus, went on to become an infantry officer, and earned our nation's highest military award for valor. Shortly after the 2002 building dedication, I suggested to Andy that both of us, and many of the members of our committee, may now be in the autumn of our years. October, I hope, not December. And that, and also reflected that this magnificent building, an enduring legacy to future Hampton citizens, will last longer than we will. The building, that is, will last longer than we will. None of this would have been possible without the 30-year effort of Andy Greenwell. So I thank Andy, and all of us do, for making this possible. Thank you.
I can relate and identify with both individuals or entities that are being honored today. And I'll tell a little story. I was a Vietnam era veteran, and I was stationed at Fort Ruck, Alabama. And it was an aviation research outfit, and what we were doing, working with clinical psychologists in terms of where we placed the firing mechanisms in Hueys and the accuracy of that particular situation. But many of the pilots, or many of the flight instructors that were there, for the fixed-wing aircraft primarily, but also for the rotary ones, were Tuskegee Airmen. And there was a particular gentleman that lived next door to me. I lived in the community when I was in the military. It was Mr. Rose. And he was an extraordinary gentleman, and I'll always remember him fondly because of the relationship that we developed over the years. I also went to graduate school at Tuskegee. And I remember when my wife and I pulled up into the train station as we were coming into the train station, and the train station was in Cheehaw. And Cheehaw was right at where the airfield was. And there was still the tower and some of the other artifacts there. Of course, the runway had grown up with trees and grass, but you could see what it was and what it had been. Little did I realize at that time the legacy and the history associated with it at that particular juncture. And I've come to appreciate it even more that I've developed a relationship with you gentlemen and learned about the history in that regard. In terms of Andy, my wife and I were looking a couple of 3 months ago, at some old newspaper clippings, and we came across a clipping that told the story about Andy's role in making the naming of this building possible. And I said, you know, as many times as I've been in the Veterans Conference Room, that story has not been told. and we needed to do something about that. So the first thing I did was went to Annette and we got the newspaper article framed. Then we got staff working on it again, and the results of that is what you see here. And what you see here is the results of an extraordinary gentleman. Now, I can't embellish and enhance any more than what's already been said. But Ann and I worked hand in hand lockstep when I was an assistant manager in one of the departments that I was the overseer of, or was in my supervision, was the Coliseum. Well, I didn't have to worry about the Coliseum because Andy had that covered. And I was one of the ones that, at least in my words, but I also knew about his passion and his ability to get things done. So when we talked about that situation, and I knew Andy's process in terms of how he got things done, and Brian told you the story in terms of how it just got to be grandiose, and rightly so. So Andy, on behalf of the others, and everyone here in this room, thank you, my brother, for being the kind of man that you are and doing what you do.
Thank you, Mayor, for your remarks. I've asked the mayor to stand by, and I'm going to ask Karen Vogelwig to come forward. Andy's daughter, Pete, if you can assist, please, for an unveiling of the plaque. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Put it down.
And I appreciate the Medal of Honor team with Brian and the other members. And as a gentleman that's just sitting here now, he was with me during the entire time that I was pushing to get recognition to our Medal of Honor recipient, and that's George Wallace. And he was with me, right by me, the entire time. And we're very, very close. We've done a lot of things together over the years when I was with the city. I relate a lot to Lieutenant Ruppert Sargent, in that I'm pushing the heck out of '86, and I go back a lot of wars. And I remember my daddy and others in World War I, and my brother was a Marine in World War II, and I was volunteered for the draft during the Korean function and ended up getting over there for a year. So anyhow, my daughter Carol, her husband was in combat, wounded in Vietnam, and my grandson, who came to me a few years ago and said, I want to go in the Marine Corps, he's graduating from high school. And I said, well, have you thought about the Coast Guard? So anyhow, he said, I'm going in the Marines, and I'm going in the infantry, or I'm not going in the Marines. So my grandson, I went down to his graduation, and there's his nephew back there, and he was a designated MOS as a rifleman in a combat infantry outfit in Afghanistan. And so he was over there deployed for 8 months. And the one thing I said to my daughter, the mother, that keep an eye on Will when he comes home, because they have such a thing as post-traumatic syndrome. And I've been around a lot. I'm in 3 veterans organizations myself, and we've seen a lot. So my younger brother over there, he's not saying anything, but he outranked me. I was a corporal and he was a Marine captain. So anyhow, going back to World War II, I was a teenager, and we had a little high school, and in my class there were 48 of us. That's how size it was. I was in elementary school, and in high school in the 30s, was this guy named Waller Francis Duke. And his family and my family were just tight as they could be. We called him Walt T. And he took me around. I was in the elementary grades, and he was in high school. And he just put his arms around us because our daddies and families were very, very close. I worked for his brother later on. Anyhow, Waller Francis went to University of Maryland, where my brother and I graduated from, and he went 1 year prior to the war, and then he went up to Canada and joined the Royal Canadian Air Force, became a pilot. And then when we entered the war, he transferred over to the Army Air Corps, and he was assigned in a P-38. He used to come down, fly over our town when he was at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland, and I lived in Maryland, and he came over all the time and right down over the poles when he could get a chance, light poles. Well, make a long story short, he got transferred to the China-Burma India Theater of Operations, and he was the leading P-38 ace over there. And he was on his last mission, and he was to come home. And he went out on this mission, and they used to go over and taunt the Japanese pilots, and but this time they were waiting for him. And they had one heck of a battle over there, and he was the captain, and he was on his way back with his group. He had to break out of there, and he missed his wingman, and they said, well, he's not with us. So Walt T. told the next in command to take the squadron back to the base, and he went back to, and after the war they found out what he did. He went back and they were waiting for such an occasion, and a bunch of Japanese fighter planes were there. Instead of when he went in, Walt T. went in, he didn't back off. He went into the group and shot 3 of them down, and he was top P-38 pilot in the CBI. He had 13 Japanese planes, but the thing is, they shot him down, and this was on the very day that the Allies landed in Normandy. That very day he was shot down, and the wingman 2 days later made his way back through the jungles and re-entered the squadron, and they never found Walter. Guess what? He will be coming home any day now after 70-some years. They found his P-38, and they got his remains, and I'm going to be there for his funeral. So all of you veterans and their families and friends, thank you very much, particularly my Korean War veterans back there.
The dangers inherent in flying the skies in combat. We recognize the Hampton Roads World War II documented original Tuskegee Airmen, heroes of the air and ground, the Dodas, the Legacy Airmen, the ones who all got it started. I had an interesting exchange of emails with T.J. Spann, who will be talking to you in a moment. He's the president of the Tidewater Tuskegee Airmen, and he's the first vice president of the Eastern region. And he wrote that he takes great pride in bragging on our Dodas and getting their stories told as much as possible, in as many places as possible, with as much fuss and pomp as they can get away with. And we're glad, TJ, that we're a part of that. You know, Hampton Roads is the world's military headquarters. The 2000 census shows that Hampton had the greatest concentration of veterans of any city in our country, with a population of 100,000 or more. 27% of those 18 years or older were veterans in the 2000 census. Here, surrounded by military, sometimes we find ourselves forgetting how extraordinary this military community really is. Look at this. You're looking at 4 DOTAs. Do you realize how extraordinary that is? We're in really good company with the Tuskegee Airmen, both the legacies and the honoraries. But I'll tell you what, they've been in some great company. I'm just going to allude to one. I hope we measure up. Back in January of 2012, Black Entertainment Television, BET, recognized Stevie Wonder, Mariah Carey, Maya Angelou, Spike Lee, and the Tuskegee Airmen. Oh, by the way, in attendance were folks you might have heard of, Cuba Gooding Jr. and Terrence Howard. See, they were about to bring the story of the Tuskegee Airmen to the world through a movie that we all know, Red Tails, a wonderful production by George Lucas. We wanted to invite Stevie Wonder to perform here. He just wasn't available. Ladies and gentlemen, the Tuskegee Airmen, heroes of the air and ground.
It's an honor to read the names of 11 Hampton Roads World War II Tuskegee Airmen, who we normally say are the documented original Tuskegee Airmen referred to as DOTAs. And ladies and gentlemen, it is a special honor to have the 4 out of the 11 names that I'm about to read of the 4 living World War II Tuskegee Airmen seated before you. It's such an honor. The Hampton Military Affairs Committee pause to honor your extraordinary legacy and contribution to the U.S. Armed Forces in this nation. And as I read the names, I would ask that you not stand if you're not able to stand, but to wave your hand so that this audience will know who you are. And I would ask that the audience hold your applause to the end of the reading. I will read the names, the branch of service, and the city within Hampton Roads that these honorees are associated with. Mr. Lawrence E. Anderson, U.S. Army Air Corps, Norfolk. Corporal Wilbert C. Gore, Sr., U.S. Army Air Corps, Portsmouth. Senior Master Sergeant Emmett T. Hayes, U.S. Air Force, Hampton. And that was Corporal Wilbert C. Gore, Sr., U.S. Army Air Corps, Portsmouth. Thank you. Master Sergeant Ezra M. Hill, Sr., U.S. Air Force, Hampton. Lieutenant Colonel Francis L. Horn, Sr., U.S. Army, Hampton. Staff Sergeant Utha Sonny Knox, U.S. Army Air Corps, South Hill. Major William Morris, U.S. Air Force, Norfolk. Sergeant Harry A. Quinton, U.S. Army Air Corps, Williamsburg. Corporal William R. White, Sr., U.S. Army Air Corps, Smithfield. Chief Master Sergeant Grant S. Williams, Sr., U.S. Air Force, Hampton. And the final name, First Lieutenant James Williams, U.S. Army Air Corps, Hampton. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a standing ovation.
Truly, this is a tough act to follow. I mean, everybody that's been to the podium so far has said, stolen a lot of my thunder already. But you can never go wrong if you recognize some of the young ladies in the audience that may not have been able to stand up, and that's the spouses. So I'll start with the spouses that of Dr. Hill, as well as the spouse of Mr. White, they're in the front row here, and they didn't stand, but I just wanted y'all to know that they were here too. So let's give them a round of applause. Okay, good evening, Mayor Wallace, city leaders, General Arnold, Colonel Galbraith, Veteran Service Organization leaders, guests, friends, my wife and my daughters, as well as the members of the Tidewater Chapter, Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated, and last but not least, our documented original Tuskegee Airmen. It's an honor to stand here to do you the honor of acknowledging some of your accomplishments and some of the things that have not been said already. I mean, General Arnold stole a lot of it. But there's still, I'm gonna give a good stab at it, to do the best I can to recover. Today, the City of Hampton, its leaders, and the leaders of the Hampton Military Affairs Committee have decided to honor heroes of Hampton Roads. And we thank you in advance for this honor and for remembering our Tuskegee Airmen and the replica of the Congressional Gold Medal that they received from the second President Bush in 2000, in this millennium. 74 years ago, these 4 documented original Tuskegee Airmen that sit before you, and as you've heard, we call them DOTAs. They were very, very young men, and they were amongst 19,000 plus other men who looked just like them. They had to fight for the right to fight for the country, as you heard our Vice President already said. Like all youngsters who entered the service, some rules applied to all no matter the color of their skin. Much like their white counterparts, these DOTAs learned day one to always follow the last order they were given. Period, dot, full stop. To think before they were told to think was not an option. Period, full stop. Failure was not an option. Period, full stop. This was the standard line of discipline ingrained in all recruits back in the 40s, and arguably is still the case today in boot camps, some military training operations, and some live military operations that span our globe. This line of discipline was applied to all recruits, and a line was drawn in the sand, so to speak, for each one to grasp and to heed it to live. These 4 men and the 19,000 plus other men who looked just like them started their military service in segregated units, but the starting line for them began much farther back than their white U.S. counterparts. They came from all parts of the United States, like Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, and D.C., prior to going to their basic military training schools. But no matter where they came from, there were blatant reminders of the widespread notion in most of the U.S., particularly in the South, that Dr. Quinton kind of alluded to already, that blacks were inherently inferior to whites, which suggested that failure was an option for them. In fact, a 1925 Army War College study of black troops in World War I concluded Negroes were subservient, mentally inferior, and barely fit for combat. This was the environment and the policy that these men experienced as they participated in what many of them termed a science project doomed to fail, called the Tuskegee Airmen experiment. But they did not fail, because for their leader, failure was still not an option for them or any man in his unit. Failure was not an option because of the leadership of a man among young men whose steely tenacity enabled him to endure the rigor and maltreatment aimed at him at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. His name was Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the son of the first black U.S. Army general. Let me briefly share just a few gems of our own DOTA's remarks about their special leader who helped them to succeed during the Tuskegee Airmen experiment. While at West Point in 1932, B.O. Davis Jr. was shunned by his fellow cadets for 4 years as he was the only black cadet at West Point. For 4 years, he roomed alone, had to get permission to eat with 250 plus fellow cadets every day, and was denied every day the opportunity by each cadet to sit with them even when there was table space for 4 years. In Davis's own words, he called himself an invisible man. The silent treatment Davis received was commonly applied to cadets who violated the honor code. Davis did not violate any code. He was just black, and no other black cadet had graduated from West Point in the 20th century until he did. Davis graduated 35th in a class of 276. In the end, his steely tenacity won the respect of the same cadets who shunned him. And now, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point is erecting a $168 million barracks, also called a dormitory, to house 650 cadets, to be finished in January 2017, and is going to be named after, you know who, General B.O. Davis Jr., who was the embodiment of duty, honor, and country. Folks, this was the man who led these young men. Many of our chapter dodos who served under him have passed on to the Lonely Eagles chapter, as we call it. But two in particular quoted Davis as telling them, "Don't you ever believe that you are inferior to anybody else." This motivated hundreds of them deployed in North Africa and Italy. These four men here to my left, and the 19,000 plus other men who looked just like them that participated in the Tuskegee Airmen experiment, are products of Davis's staunch leadership and unwavering discipline. He inspired the men in the 332nd Fighter Group who fought in World War II, as well as those men in the 477th Bombardment Group who diligently trained and prepared for a war that ended before they could deploy. Although Davis inspired and mentored tens of thousands, not all dodos thought what they achieved was a big deal or noteworthy, and they did not talk about their service to their spouses, children, or friends. For this reason, a couple names are missing from the plaque to be unveiled today, so as to locate those dodos' families and place them amongst their Hampton Roads Dodo family. But those dodos who did talk of their World War II achievements met in the mid-70s in Detroit, Michigan as part of a reunion. This reunion caught on and caught the attention of a few military careers who were directly and positively impacted by their achievements, and a National Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated organization was born. In 1982, the Tidewater Chapter Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated organization was founded, and United States Air Force retired Colonel Dr. Leroy Gross, the former 1st Fighter Wing Hospital commander, was the founding president, with 5 documented original Tuskegee Airmen and 22 other chapter members getting the organization chartered in Virginia. Today, the Tidewater chapter is one of 50 plus chapters who are chartered to 1. Continue the proud legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen and their accomplishments via speakers, bureaus, forums, at businesses, in classroom, and with memorials in the community at large. Number 2, to support deserving area scholars through fundraising activities to go to a college university of their choosing. 3, expose youth to flying activities, careers in science, technology, engineering, and math. Every chapter member is a volunteer, and we represent all cultural groups and non-military as well as military connected professionals. So what I'm saying is everybody in here could be a member of our chapter. No one is excluded. You know us by our red jackets that are symbolic of the red paint on the tip and tail of the P-51 Mustang flown by many Tuskegee Airmen pilots. The sea of red jackets and many chapters members who are not wearing their red jackets today represent rated fields like pilots, navigators, flight engineers, etc., as well as non-rated support fields that kept or keep planes flying today, like mechanics, supply, flight crash and rescue, doctors, nurses, acquisition professionals, etc. We meet every second Wednesday of each month right here in this room at 6 p.m. Second Wednesday each month right here at 6 o'clock. We endeavor to do the business of the chapter, as John Gately has already stated for me, and to hear from our dodos during a segment we call Dodo Reflection. What you heard in this video is what we call the DOTA reflection. We allow the DOTAs, they will probably take it over anyway, but we allow the DOTAs to remind us of some of those gems that they experienced back in the day that didn't make it in the books, that didn't make it in the stories that we may have heard. That's what we do on the second Wednesday of each month. The gems that the DOTAs share are invaluable and often eye-opening. We captured these and are prepared to share them with the community at large when they are no longer with us. As I close, I'd like to share 4 endeavors on our radar right now. On the 31st of this month, our chapter has a fashion show at Fort Monroe Theater to raise money for our scholars, to continue to go out to the schools and talk to the children, to business leaders about the Tuskegee Airmen and their story. Secondly, on June 6th, 7 o'clock a.m., we have a golf tournament slated to occur at Williamsburg National Golf Club. $10,000, some money appeals to some people, so it's $10,000 whole in one prize. $85 per person, $320 for a foursome. Thirdly, we have an annual Education Assistance Scholarship Award Gala slated to occur at Joint Base Langley Eustis's Commonwealth Center on 8 August at 6 p.m. The tickets are $55 per person, and this is where we recognize those scholars in that area. And last but not least, we are launching our newest fundraiser to build the Tuskegee Airmen Memorial in Hampton Air Power Park. We've talked to our city leaders, we've talked to the mayor. They've embraced us, we've embraced them. We thank you for the opportunity to erect a memorial to honor these 4 men and the 19,000 others who fought for the right to fight for their own country. I will close with what I said at the beginning of my remarks on behalf of the DOTAs and members of the Tidewater chapter and members of the national organization as well. We thank the city of Hampton, its leaders, the MAC leaders, and members for honoring these men for digging deep and believing in themselves and their leader and winning the battle as they fought for the right to fight for their own country and ours. If it had not been for you guys and a few women, there were about 18 women who were Tuskegee Airmen as well. Had it not been for your valiant efforts and courage, I would not be standing here as a lieutenant colonel today. There are a number of us in the audience who would not have achieved Chief Master Sergeant ranks in the Air Force as well. We thank you. We can't thank you enough, and we're not, as I think General Arnold said, we're not done until we follow. God bless you and thank you. Thank you, everyone.
City of Hampton, Virginia, proclamation proclaiming May 12th, 2015 as Tuskegee Airmen Day in the city of Hampton, Virginia. And this, you can applaud. And this is done in recognition of the Tidewater chapter, Tuskegee Airmen, Legacy Airmen. Whereas 11 Legacy Airmen and members of the Tuskegee chapter, Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated reside, serve, and contribute to the education and advancement of Tuskegee Airmen, experiment and experiences in local communities in Hampton Roads, Virginia, and will be honored as the Hampton Roads World War II Tuskegee Airmen. Whereas Legacy Airmen distinguished themselves through exemplary service in the United States, North Africa, Italy, and Germany from 1942 to 1947. And whereas these Legacy Airmen, in conjunction with 450 forward deployed fighter pilots and nearly 10,000 support personnel, performed admirably in combat by providing fighter escort services for bombers headed to their targets, and received more than 900 medals comprised of distinguished flying crosses, Purple Hearts, Bronze Stars, and Air Medals. And whereas the Legacy Airmen, alongside a total of 996 trainer, fighter, and bomber pilots, and more than 19,000 support personnel, during a period of racial discrimination in the Air Force during World War II, they displayed courage, valor, and patriotism in service to the United States while they fought for the right to fight for their own country. And whereas Legacy Airmen's exemplary service, coupled with their determination to serve this country in positions of greater responsibility, significantly contributed to the Armed Forces' decision to integrate the military services. And whereas the Legacy Airmen have educated and inspired citizens, old and young, with their uplifting recollections of the humility and oppression they faced while helping to defeat an unrelenting enemy. And their efforts have extended beyond Tidewater to cities throughout Virginia, North Carolina, and Washington, D.C. And whereas the Legacy Airmen of the Tuskegee chapter of Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated have brought great distinction to the city of Hampton through the countless hours they have contributed and devoted to the preservation of the history of the Tuskegee Airmen. Therefore, I, George E. Wallace, Mayor on behalf of the City Council and the citizens of the City of Hampton, Virginia, do hereby proclaim May 12th, 2015 as Tuskegee Airmen Day in the City of Hampton, Virginia, and urge all, yes. And urge all citizens to express their gratitude to the Legacy Airmen of the Tidewater chapter of Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated for their service and contributions to the United States of America. In the witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the City of Hampton to be affixed this 12th day of May 2015, and is signed by me proudly and honorably. I'd like to present it to you, gentlemen.